The ancient oak doors of Ashford Palace had witnessed 3 centuries of royal secrets, but none as explosive as what Princess Isabella and Prince Alexander were about to reveal about their father, King Edmund. In the shadow of towering stone walls that had sheltered monarchs through wars, scandals, and revolutions, 2 of the kingdom's most trusted royals prepared to shatter everything the public believed about their beloved sovereign. Isabella's hands trembled as she held the leather-bound journal that would change everything. The afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across pages filled with their father's own handwriting, words that revealed a truth so shocking it could topple the very foundation of the Ashford monarchy. "Once we speak these words, there's no taking them back," Alexander whispered to his sister, his usually steady voice betraying the magnitude of what they were about to unleash. The weight of crown jewels seemed nothing compared to the burden of the secret they now carried. What they had discovered about King Edmund wasn't just a family matter. It was a revelation that would rewrite history books, challenge the legitimacy of the throne, and force an entire nation to question everything they thought they knew about honor, duty, and the price of wearing a crown. The truth was about to emerge, and the kingdom would never be the same. The morning mist clung to the gardens of Ashford Palace like a shroud of secrecy, and Princess Isabella felt its chill penetrate her silk robe as she hurried through the maze of perfectly manicured hedges. Her bare feet moved silently across the dew-soaked grass, following a path she had memorized in childhood but now walked with the urgent purpose of someone carrying an impossible burden. 3 days had passed since she had made the discovery that changed everything. 3 sleepless nights of staring at ornate ceiling frescoes while her mind raced through the implications of what she had found hidden in their father's private study. The leather journal, bound in deep burgundy with the royal seal embossed in gold, contained words that could destroy not just their family, but the very institution of the monarchy itself. Isabella reached the ancient gazebo that overlooked the palace's sprawling grounds, where Prince Alexander waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Even in the dim light, she could see the strain etched across her brother's face. At 28, Alexander possessed the natural authority that came with being heir to the throne, but today he looked younger, more vulnerable than she had seen him since childhood. "You brought it?" Alexander asked, though his eyes had already found the journal clutched against Isabella's chest. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. The weight of the book seemed to increase with each passing hour, as if the secrets contained within were growing heavier with their own dark gravity. When she placed it on the weathered stone table between them, both siblings stared at it, as if it might burst into flames. "I've been thinking about what Father told us when we were children," Isabella finally whispered, "about how the crown carries the weight of truth, and that truth is what gives a monarch the right to rule." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "Ironic, isn't it? All those lessons about honor and duty, about the sacred responsibility of leadership." He gestured toward the journal. "And now this." The discovery had been accidental, as earth-shattering revelations often are. Isabella had been searching for their father's reading glasses in his private study when her hand had bumped against a hidden panel behind the bookshelf. The secret compartment had opened with a soft click, revealing documents and journals that King Edmund had clearly never intended for anyone else to see. What she found inside challenged everything the royal family, and indeed the entire kingdom of Ashford, believed about their history. The journal detailed King Edmund's discovery, made 25 years earlier when he had first ascended to the throne, that he was not the rightful heir. Through meticulous genealogical research that he had conducted in secret, Edmund had uncovered evidence that his older brother, Prince Frederick, who had supposedly died in infancy, had actually been hidden away after a failed assassination attempt. Frederick had been raised in exile, unaware of his true identity, while Edmund grew up believing himself to be the legitimate heir. By the time Edmund discovered the truth, Frederick had died in a remote village, taking his rightful claim to the throne with him to the grave. But Frederick had left behind a son who was very much alive and completely unaware that he was the true heir to the Ashford crown. "Read it again," Alexander said quietly, opening the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The part about the birthmark. Isabella's fingers traced their father's careful handwriting as she read aloud. Frederick's son bears the same crescent-shaped birthmark that has appeared on every true Ashford heir for 7 generations. The mark that neither Alexander nor Isabella possess, because the bloodline they believe runs through their veins, is a lie built upon tragedy and circumstance. The implications were staggering. Not only was their father not the rightful king, but neither Alexander nor Isabella had any legitimate claim to the throne. Somewhere in the kingdom lived a man who was the true heir, probably working an ordinary job, living an ordinary life, completely unaware that he was the rightful king of Ashford. Father never tried to find him, Alexander observed, his voice heavy with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. He could have searched, could have made things right. Could he? Isabella challenged gently. Think about what that would have meant. Not just for him, but for us, for the entire kingdom. 25 years ago, Ashford was just emerging from the economic crisis that nearly bankrupted us. Father had spent years implementing reforms, building relationships with other nations, establishing the prosperity we enjoy today. To reveal that his reign was illegitimate would have thrown the country into chaos. They sat in contemplative silence as the first rays of sunlight began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The palace was beginning to stir with the quiet activity of servants preparing for another day of royal duties, ceremonies, and public appearances. Soon, Isabella would need to attend a charity luncheon for children's literacy programs, and Alexander had meetings with agricultural ministers about new farming initiatives. They would smile, wave, cut ribbons, and shake hands, all while carrying the knowledge that every moment of their public lives was built upon a foundation of unintended deception. There's something else, Isabella said, retrieving another document from the journal. Father didn't just discover the truth and do nothing. He's been secretly supporting Frederick's son and his family for years. Anonymous donations, scholarships for the children, medical bills paid through untraceable charitable foundations. Alexander examined the financial records that detailed decades of careful, hidden generosity. Marcus Webb, he read from one of the documents. 32 years old, married to Sarah, 2 young children. He works as a teacher in the village of Millbrook, about 40 miles from here. Father's been watching over him, protecting him, ensuring his family has everything they need, Isabella continued. But Marcus has no idea why good fortune seems to follow his family, or why his children always seem to receive the best educational opportunities. The morning was growing brighter, and with the increasing light came the pressing reality of their situation. In his journal, King Edmund had written extensively about his internal struggle with the truth he had discovered. He had considered revealing everything on multiple occasions, but had always concluded that the stability and prosperity of the kingdom had to take precedence over strict genealogical legitimacy. He's been carrying this burden alone for 25 years, Alexander said softly. Every crown ceremony, every state dinner, every time he sits on the throne, he knows he doesn't belong there. Isabella thought about their father's increasingly frequent retreats to his private study in recent months, the way he had seemed distant during family gatherings, the sadness that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. Now she understood that King Edmund had been wrestling with a secret that was slowly consuming him from the inside. The question is, she said, closing the journal carefully, what do we do with this knowledge? They both understood that they were facing an impossible choice. To reveal the truth would mean acknowledging that their entire lives had been built on a lie, that the man they loved and respected as both father and king had unknowingly usurped a throne that didn't belong to him. It would mean finding Marcus Webb and telling him that his simple life as a village teacher was about to be destroyed because he was, in fact, the rightful king of Ashford. But to remain silent meant continuing to live the lie, accepting honors and privileges that weren't rightfully theirs, and allowing an innocent man to remain ignorant of his true heritage and the throne that belonged to him by birthright. We could go to Father first, Alexander suggested. Tell him we know, and ask him what he thinks we should do. He'll tell us to keep the secret. Isabella replied with certainty. He's already made his choice. For 25 years, he's chosen stability over truth. He won't change his mind now. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the palace walls in warm golden light, The two siblings faced the reality that their discovery had thrust them into a position where any choice they made would have profound consequences. The weight of the crown, they were learning, was not just about the physical burden of gold and jewels, but about the impossible decisions that came with power and responsibility. "There's one more thing," Isabella said quietly, pulling out the final document from the journal. Father's health reports from his private physician. Alexander's face went pale as he read the medical assessments that revealed King Edmund's declining condition. The stress of carrying his secret for so many years had taken a significant toll on his health, and the reports suggested that the king's time might be more limited than anyone in the royal family had realized. "He's dying," Alexander whispered, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence not just for their father, but for their entire way of life. The implications were clear and terrifying. If King Edmund died without revealing the truth, Alexander would ascend to a throne that wasn't rightfully his. The coronation ceremony would be a magnificent lie, witnessed by millions around the world, cementing an illegitimate reign that could last for decades. But if they revealed the truth now, they would not only destroy their father's legacy, but also thrust an unprepared village teacher into a role that would fundamentally change everything about his existence and the existence of his family. As Isabella and Alexander sat in the growing daylight, surrounded by the beauty and grandeur of a palace that might not rightfully belong to them, they realized they had stumbled upon a secret that would force them to redefine everything they understood about duty, loyalty, truth, and justice. The journal lay closed between them, its secrets temporarily contained, but no less explosive for being hidden. Soon, they would have to decide whether the truth was worth the price it would exact from everyone they loved, including the innocent man whose life would be forever changed by knowledge he had never sought and might never want. The morning mist had lifted completely now, revealing the palace gardens in their full splendor, but for Isabella and Alexander, the clarity of daylight only made their impossible situation more starkly apparent. They were no longer just royals carrying out ceremonial duties. They had become the guardians of a truth that could reshape the very foundations of their kingdom. The drive to Millbrook Village felt like a journey to another world, though it was only 40 miles from the marble halls and golden fixtures of Ashford Palace. Isabella sat in the passenger seat of Alexander's unmarked sedan, both of them dressed in simple civilian clothes that felt strange and liberating after a lifetime of formal attire and royal protocols. They had told their security detail that they needed a private afternoon for personal matters, something that had become increasingly common as they struggled with the weight of their secret. 3 weeks had passed since their dawn conversation in the gazebo, 3 weeks of sleepless nights and carefully maintained public appearances while their private world crumbled beneath the truth they now carried. Isabella had found herself studying her father's face during official ceremonies, looking for signs of the burden he had carried alone for so many years. King Edmund's smile remained warm and reassuring to the public, but his children now noticed the weariness in his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight that grew heavier with each passing day. They had decided they needed to see Marcus Webb for themselves before making any decisions about revealing the truth. It seemed impossible to determine the right course of action without understanding who the man was, what kind of life he had built, and how the revelation might affect not just him but his innocent wife and children. Millbrook was the kind of village that appeared on postcards advertising the pastoral beauty of rural Ashford. Stone cottages with thatched roofs lined winding streets, and gardens overflowed with late autumn flowers that painted the landscape in shades of rust and gold. It was peaceful, charming, and utterly removed from the political complexities and public pressures that defined royal life. "There," Alexander said quietly, pointing to a modest 2-story house with ivy climbing its walls and a small garden gate painted bright blue. "According to Father's records, that's where he lives." They parked across the street, feeling like spies in their own kingdom. Through the front window, they could see warm lights spilling from what appeared to be a living room, and occasionally shadows moved past the glass, suggesting the quiet domestic activity of a family going about their evening routine. "We can't just sit here and watch him," Isabella said, though she made no move to leave the car. This feels like we're invading his privacy. We are, Alexander admitted. But we need to understand what we're dealing with. If we're going to turn his world upside down, we need to know what world we're destroying. As if summoned by their conversation, the front door of the cottage opened, and a man emerged with two young children. Even from across the street, both siblings immediately recognized the unmistakable resemblance to their father. Marcus Webb had the same strong jawline that characterized the Ashford royal family, the same intelligent eyes, and the same way of carrying himself with quiet confidence. But more striking than his familiar features was the crescent-shaped birthmark visible on his left temple, the mark that had distinguished true Ashford heirs for 7 generations. "Dear God," Isabella whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her own temple where no such mark existed. "He looks exactly like father did at that age." They watched as Marcus knelt down to help his daughter, who appeared to be about 5 years old, with her coat zipper. His son, perhaps 7 years old, bounced impatiently beside them, eager to begin what was clearly a planned evening walk. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully domestic, that Isabella felt her heart break for what they might be about to destroy. "Look at how happy they are," she said, observing the easy laughter and casual affection that characterized the family's interactions. "They have everything that matters: love, security, contentment. What right do we have to take that away from them?" Alexander was thinking about the responsibilities that came with ruling a kingdom. But what right do we have to deny him his birthright? That man is the rightful king of Ashford. His children are the rightful heirs to the throne. Every day we remain silent is another day we're stealing from him. A woman appeared in the doorway, Sarah Webb, Marcus's wife according to the documents they had seen. She was pretty in an understated way, with kind eyes, and the sort of genuine smile that came from someone who had never had to calculate the political implications of her facial expressions. She called out something to her family, and Marcus turned to wave at her, his face lighting up with the sort of uncomplicated love that Isabella had seen in fairy tales, but never experienced in the carefully orchestrated relationships that defined royal life. "She has no idea," Isabella observed. "She thinks she married a village teacher, not a king." They continued watching as the Webb family began their evening walk, moving down the quiet street with the easy pace of people who had nowhere urgent to be and no one waiting to document their every movement. The children skipped ahead while Marcus and Sarah walked hand in hand, occasionally stopping to examine something interesting in a neighbor's garden or to greet other villagers they encountered. "He's a teacher," Alexander said, remembering the details from their father's records. "He teaches history and literature at the local school. Apparently, he's quite beloved by his students and their families." The irony was not lost on either of them. The man who should have been ruling a kingdom was instead educating the next generation in a small village school, probably earning a modest salary and worrying about ordinary concerns like mortgage payments and school supplies. Meanwhile, they lived in a palace with hundreds of servants, unlimited resources, and the power to influence national policy, all because of a tragic case of mistaken identity that had occurred before any of them were even born. "I've been thinking about what Father wrote in his journal," Isabella said as they watched the Webb family disappear around a corner, "about how revealing the truth would cause chaos in the kingdom. But is that really our decision to make? Shouldn't Marcus have the right to choose whether he wants his throne, even if that choice might be difficult for everyone else?" Alexander considered this as they sat in the growing darkness of the car. But what if he doesn't want it? What if he's perfectly happy with his life as it is? We could destroy his family's peace and security for a crown he never asked for and might not want. They had been grappling with these impossible questions for weeks, and every angle they examined seemed to lead to pain for someone. To reveal the truth would devastate their father, who had spent 25 years building a reign he now knew was illegitimate. It would shatter Alexander's future as the heir apparent, and force Isabella to confront the reality that her entire identity was built on a lie. But, most critically, it would thrust Marcus Webb and his family into a situation they had never chosen and might not be able to handle. "There's something else we need to consider," Alexander said quietly. "Father's doctors say he might have less time than we thought. If he dies while we're still debating what to do, the decision will be made for us. I'll become king, and this secret will be buried forever. The weight of that possibility settled over them both. King Edmund's declining health had become more apparent in recent weeks, though he continued to maintain his public schedule with characteristic determination. The stress of carrying his secret had clearly accelerated his physical deterioration, and his private physician had discreetly suggested that the royal family should begin preparing for the possibility that his reign might end sooner than anyone had anticipated. Maybe that's what Father wants, Isabella suggested. Maybe he's hoping that if he can hold on to his secret until the end, we'll never have to face this choice. But that would make us complicit in the deception, Alexander replied. Every day I spend preparing to be king is another day I'm actively participating in a lie that affects not just our family, but the entire constitutional foundation of our government. As they drove back toward the palace in contemplative silence, both siblings were acutely aware that they were no longer simply discovering a family secret. They had become participants in an ongoing deception that grew more complex with each passing day. The comfortable certainties that had defined their lives were dissolving, replaced by moral ambiguities that had no clear resolution. Back at the palace, they found King Edmund in his private study, sitting behind the same desk where Isabella had made her fateful discovery weeks earlier. He looked up from the state papers he was reviewing, and, for a moment, Isabella thought she saw a flicker of knowing in his eyes, as if he suspected what they had been doing. "You both seem troubled lately," he observed, his voice carrying the gentle concern of a father rather than the formal authority of a monarch. "Is everything all right?" Isabella exchanged a quick glance with Alexander. This was their opportunity to confront their father with what they knew, to ask for his guidance in navigating the impossible situation they now shared. But, looking at King Edmund's kind face, seeing the genuine love and concern he had for them, neither sibling could bring themselves to add to the burden he was already carrying. "We're fine, Father," Alexander said, the lie feeling heavy on his tongue. "Just thinking about the future, about the responsibilities that come with our positions." King Edmund nodded thoughtfully. "The crown can be a heavy burden," he said, and Isabella wondered if he was speaking from the experience of wearing a crown he now knew didn't rightfully belong to him. Sometimes the hardest part isn't making the right decision, but living with the consequences of necessary choices. After they left their father's study, Isabella and Alexander found themselves back in the family's private sitting room, surrounded by centuries of royal portraits that now seemed to mock them with their confident expressions and elaborate crowns. Every painting represented someone who had believed in their legitimate right to rule, someone who had worn the crown without the crushing knowledge that their entire bloodline was built on a case of mistaken identity. "We can't keep this secret forever," Isabella said finally. "It's eating us alive, and it's only going to get worse." "But we also can't make this decision lightly," Alexander countered. "Once we reveal the truth, there's no going back. Marcus Webb's life will never be the same, and neither will ours." They had reached a crossroads that demanded action, but every path forward seemed fraught with pain and uncertainty. The comfortable world of royal privilege and predetermined destiny that had shaped their entire lives was crumbling around them, replaced by moral complexities that had no guidebook or protocol to follow. As they sat in the ornate room that might not rightfully belong to them, surrounded by symbols of a heritage that might not be theirs to claim, Isabella and Alexander realized that their discovery had transformed them from passive recipients of royal inheritance into active participants in a drama that would determine not just their own futures, but the future of the kingdom itself. The choice they faced was no longer just about revealing a secret. It was about deciding what kind of people they wanted to be and what kind of legacy they wanted to leave behind. The truth had made them powerful in a way they had never anticipated, giving them the ability to reshape the very foundations of their society. But with that power came a responsibility that neither of them had been trained to handle, and the weight of it was threatening to crush them both. #Royal Secrets. Part 3. The decision came suddenly, as momentous decisions often do, born not from careful planning but from an unexpected encounter that made continuing their silence impossible. Isabella had been attending the annual Education Excellence Awards ceremony at the Royal Concert Hall when she noticed a familiar face among the honored teachers. Marcus Webb stood on the stage accepting recognition for his innovative literacy programs, his humble smile and genuine gratitude making him stand out among the other recipients who seemed more comfortable with public attention. Sitting in the royal box, wearing her ceremonial tiara and formal gown, Isabella felt the surreal disconnect between her ornate surroundings and the simple dignity of the man who should rightfully be sitting in her place. When Marcus stepped forward to deliver a brief acceptance speech, his words about the importance of education and serving others struck her as the kind of wisdom that should come from someone who understood the true meaning of leadership. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, looking directly up at the royal box where Isabella sat with other members of the royal family. "I want to thank you for your continued support of education in our kingdom. It is an honor to serve in a nation where learning is valued and teachers are recognized for their contribution to society." The irony of the moment was almost unbearable. Here was the rightful king of Ashford, publicly thanking the woman who sat on his throne for supporting the work he did in a village classroom because he had been denied his birthright. Isabella managed to maintain her composure and smile graciously, but inside she felt as though she was participating in the cruelest deception imaginable. After the ceremony, she made an impulsive decision that would change everything. Instead of returning directly to the palace, she instructed her driver to take her to Millbrook Village. She needed to see Marcus Webb again, this time not as a distant observer, but as someone who might finally have the courage to begin correcting a 25-year-old mistake. She found him in his classroom at the village school, staying late to grade papers and prepare lessons for the following day. Through the window, she could see him working by lamplight, surrounded by colorful drawings his students had created and motivational posters that encouraged reading and curiosity. The scene was so different from the formal meetings and state dinners that filled her own days, yet it seemed more genuinely purposeful than anything she had ever done. Isabella had dismissed her security detail and changed into simple civilian clothes, hoping to approach Marcus without the fanfare that usually surrounded royal visits. When she knocked on the classroom door, he looked up with surprise but no recognition, seeing only a well-dressed woman who might be a parent or education official. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, setting down his pen and giving her his full attention with the kind of genuine interest that suggested he was always willing to discuss his students or his work. "I hope so," Isabella said, her heart pounding as she realized she was about to cross a line that would change both their lives forever. "My name is Isabella, and I need to speak with you about something very important. Something about your family history." Marcus gestured for her to take a seat in one of the adult-sized chairs that had been arranged for parent conferences. His expression was curious, but not alarmed, suggesting that unexpected visitors were not unusual in his world. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Are you with the genealogy service? I know some people are interested in tracing their family trees, but I've never really looked into mine. My parents died when I was young, and I don't have much information about previous generations." Isabella felt her throat tighten with emotion. This man had no idea that he was an orphan because his father had been hidden away to protect him from an assassination attempt, or that his lack of family history was the result of a carefully constructed deception designed to keep him safe from those who would have killed him for his royal blood. "Marcus," she said gently, using his first name though protocol dictated that, as his subject, she should have been addressing him as Your Majesty. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. You are not who you think you are." She watched confusion and concern cross his face as she began to explain the incredible truth about his heritage. She told him about Prince Frederick, the rightful heir who had been hidden away as a child, about King Edmund's discovery 25 years earlier, and about the evidence that proved Marcus was the legitimate king of Ashford. "This is absurd," Marcus said, standing up and moving away from the table as if physical distance could make her words less real. "I'm a teacher. I live in a cottage with my wife and children. I worry about lesson plans and parent conferences, not running a kingdom." Isabella had expected this reaction, but experiencing it firsthand made her realize how devastating this revelation would be for him. She pulled out copies of the documents she had brought from the royal archives, genealogical charts, DNA evidence that King Edmund had secretly obtained years earlier, and historical records that traced the hidden bloodline from Prince Frederick to Marcus. "Look at this," she said, showing him a photograph of Prince Frederick taken shortly before he was forced into hiding. The resemblance was unmistakable, not just in physical features, but in the intelligent expression and natural dignity that seemed to radiate from both men. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long moment, his hand unconsciously moving to the crescent-shaped birthmark on his temple. "This man looks like my father," he said quietly. "At least, like the man in the only photograph I have of him." "Because he was your grandfather," Isabella said gently. "Prince Frederick was your father's father, and you are his rightful heir." The classroom fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Isabella watched as Marcus processed the information, seeing the moment when disbelief began to give way to the horrible recognition that what she was telling him might actually be true. "If this is real," he said slowly, "then my entire life has been a lie." "Not a lie," Isabella corrected. "A protection. Your father was hidden to keep him safe, and that protection extended to you. But the price of that safety was your birthright." Marcus sat back down heavily, looking older than his 32 years. "And King Edmund knows about this?" "He's known for 25 years, Isabella admitted. "He discovered the truth shortly after he became king. But by then, he had already begun implementing policies that were bringing the country out of economic crisis. He made the decision to keep the secret rather than throw the kingdom into chaos." "And you're telling me this now because?" Isabella took a deep breath. "Because King Edmund is dying, and when he does, my brother Alexander will become king. But Alexander has no more right to that throne than I do. The crown belongs to you, Marcus. It has always belonged to you." The weight of this revelation seemed to physically press down on Marcus's shoulders. He looked around his classroom at the evidence of the life he had built, student artwork on the walls, lesson plans spread across his desk, photographs of his family tucked into the corner of his bulletin board. "I don't want to be king," he said firmly. "I want to teach children and go home to my family and live the life I've chosen for myself. I want to coach my son's football team and help my daughter with her reading. I want to grow old with Sarah and watch my children grow up in this village where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest crisis is usually a disagreement about the church bazaar." Isabella felt her heart break for him. "I understand. But wanting something different doesn't change who you are or what belongs to you by right of birth." "Who else knows?" Marcus asked, and Isabella could see him beginning to think through the implications of what she had told him. "Just my brother Alexander and myself. And King Edmund, of course, but he doesn't know that we've discovered his secret." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the village he called home. "If I were to accept this, and I'm not saying I would, what would happen to my family? To Sarah and the children?" "They would become members of the royal family," Isabella said. "Your wife would be queen, your children would be heirs to the throne. They would live in the palace, have access to the finest education and opportunities in the world, and lose everything that makes their lives worth living," Marcus countered. "My children play freely in the woods behind our house. Sarah tends her garden and teaches piano lessons to the neighborhood children. We eat dinner together every night and talk about our days. Do you think any of that would be possible if we lived in a palace surrounded by security and protocol?" Isabella thought about her own childhood, spent largely in the company of tutors and nannies while her parents attended to matters of state. She remembered formal dinners where conversation was carefully monitored and public appearances where spontaneity was impossible. The life Marcus described sounded more appealing than anything she had ever experienced as a princess. "There's something else you need to know," she said quietly. "King Edmund has been secretly supporting your family for years. The scholarship your son received for his music lessons, the grant that paid for your daughter's special tutoring, the medical bills that were mysteriously covered when you had your accident last year. All of that came from the royal treasury." Marcus turned back to face her, and she could see anger beginning to mix with the confusion and shock in his eyes. "He's been manipulating our lives? He's been trying to take care of you without revealing the truth," Isabella clarified. "Everything you've accomplished, every success your family has had, those were earned by your own efforts. But King Edmund has been quietly removing obstacles and providing opportunities because he felt responsible for the position you were put in. The position I was put in, Marcus repeated bitterly. You mean being denied my birthright so that your family could live in luxury while I worry about making mortgage payments? Isabella winced at the accusation, knowing it was accurate even though it was painful to hear. Yes, she admitted. That's exactly what I mean. The conversation that followed was difficult and emotional, with Marcus alternating between anger at the deception that had shaped his entire life and despair at the impossible choice he was now being asked to make. Isabella found herself in the strange position of arguing for something that would destroy her own future while trying to convince a reluctant man to claim a throne he had never wanted. As the evening grew later and their discussion continued, both of them began to understand that this revelation wasn't just about correcting a historical injustice. It was about two fundamentally different approaches to leadership and life. Marcus had built his identity around service to others and the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work. The royal family, despite their privileges, lived lives constrained by duty and public expectation. If I were to accept this, Marcus said finally, what would happen to you and Alexander? We would step aside, Isabella said simply. We would give up our titles, our places in the line of succession, everything. We would become private citizens. And how would you support yourselves? What would you do? Isabella realized she had never considered this practical question. I don't know, she admitted. We've never had to think about ordinary concerns like careers or earning money. The irony was not lost on either of them. The man who should have been raised with unlimited resources and preparation for leadership had instead learned practical skills and developed a strong work ethic. The people who had been given every advantage and preparation for royal duties had never learned how to function in the ordinary world. As their conversation drew to a close, Isabella realized that she had set in motion something that could not be undone. Whether Marcus ultimately chose to claim his throne or not, the secret was no longer contained within the royal family. The truth had begun to spread, and, with it, the foundations of everything they had all believed about their identities and their futures were starting to shift in ways that none of them could fully predict or control.